going, but I just have the side chat on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, that. All right, got it. It seems like Tim has got the live stream up. Usually he pops in. Ooh.
Funny.
And we're live.
Ooh. Are you in, Dodie?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay. No worries. We're live, Tim. Okay. Are you monitoring the chat? We have people coming in. No worries. We're live, Tim. Ooh. Okay. I'll just give it until what, like 6:02, and then I'll just start the introduction here. But welcome everyone who's joining Texas Real Food for our Beekeeping Social Circle series this evening. All right. Okay, I'll just go ahead and start. This will be recorded as well, so anyone who's coming in a little late and wants to hear this introduction can always go back and watch it again. But thank you to everyone who's tuning in to the second social circle. I'm Rachel. I'll be the host and I'll be moderating this panel. I've been working for Texas Real Food to coordinate this event tonight and for all future online events of this sort. This is a series is called The Social Circle. You may have been tuning in to our first one, which happened about a month ago. So we're excited to continue this series. We also have Tim, who's behind moderating the chat on Facebook and YouTube. And in just a moment, I'll introduce our two panelists. But first, I just want to introduce Texas Real Foods. For those who don't know, Texas Real Food is a directory. It's the #1 directory for all local food and agriculture businesses in Texas. We want to promote a closer relationship with food and ingredients for all Texans. And this series is aimed at budding gardeners and homesteaders, and we're really excited about today's event. This evening, we'll get to know all the basics about beekeeping. We'll hear from our panelists who are experts in everything to do with beekeeping and bees and honey. And we're just really excited that we get to hear from both of them for a full hour. And then there'll be a chance at the end, about 30 minutes, to answer any questions that people put in the chat. That's what Tim is for behind in our chat. He is moderating those. So send in questions whenever you think of them, and he'll pull out any relevant questions and send them in. As I mentioned, this event will be recorded. So if you have to leave early or if you want to watch it back, it'll be on our Facebook and our YouTube, and the recording, along with any relevant links and resources, will be sent out in an email. So if you are RSVP'd to the Eventbrite, you'll get an email from Eventbrite after the event directing you to sign up for our newsletter. And then from there, you can have access to all the material, and we'll post the link to where the recording is if you can't find it on our Facebook page. So that's just my long-winded spiel there, and on to our panelists. So first, I do have to mention that last minute we did have a slight change in one of the speakers. We were going to have Blake from Desert Creek Honey, but instead he linked us up with Dodie, who will actually be a teacher at Blake's Texas Bee Supply store in Elgin this summer. I'm sure she'll talk about that a little bit more herself, but Dodie's also the vice president of Texas Beekeeping Association, among other things. And then we also have Natalie from Be Mindful with us. She is an experienced beekeeper and activist who teaches classes and apprenticeships to hobbyists and homesteaders. She also hosts a podcast called The Honey Drive. That's super exciting, and leads the Hayes County Beekeeper Association, and also the Real Texas Honey program. So all of these things will be explained a little more as we go through, and links will be provided in our resources, but that's just an overview. And I'm excited to hear both of their great wealth of knowledge that they have. So how about we start off with Natalie? Could you start off just telling us like how you got started and your current work, what your current work entails? And I'll pull up a little slideshow that we've put together while you're talking.
Sure. I started about close to 10 years now, about 9 years. And I started with a single hive as a backyard beekeeper. Didn't really do much of anything, was fascinated with bees. And pretty soon I started going to clubs in the local area and got fascinated even more and got addicted, really. Got more bees, did more learning, got my master beekeeper, started my own club because I was all about natural beekeeping, and little by little that grew, and I started making my own money with beekeeping to kind of pay for my addiction, really, and started my company, Be Mindful, and I've got the immense privilege of working with a gentleman called Les Crowder, who is a natural beekeeping and tabar hive expert. So we are leading charge in Texas on natural beekeeping and tabar horizontal beekeeping. And that's kind of where I got started.
Great. Yeah, I'm so happy to have people on this panel with such a breadth of experience and unique perspective. So thanks so much for being here. And then Dodie, can we hear just a little bit about your current work and passions in the honeybee realm?
I probably started officially beekeeping about the same time Natalie. Both my grandfathers had bees, so I've got beekeeping in my genes. And officially beekeeping about the same time Natalie. Both my grandfather. There we go. So just like Natalie, I started going to bee clubs and got more interested, started wanting to learn more, went through the whole master beekeeper program, and started really volunteering. I was the president of the Austin area bee club for years. Just now got to release that duty. As I moved into the Texas Beekeepers Association, volunteering at that level, I was the director there for a couple of years, and now this year I'm serving as a vice president. I was also just recently asked to join the board of the Texas Master Beekeeper Program, so I'll be working on that going forward. And just love bees. It's a really cool thing to play with. I think it's also awesome that your panel is both girls in such a predominantly male kind of job, that you've got two girls here talking about it.
Yes, I'm happy about that. Of course, we'll miss Blake, but I was happy to have two women on the panel, and then myself as well. And so
Natalie, you're on mute.
I didn't put myself on mute, sorry.
That's all right. We're good
I
now.
might from time to time just mute either of you if one of you is talking, just to make it easier since we are in speaker view, just to clarify. But we'll see if that's really necessary. But anyways, so speaking of that, I just wanted to highlight that you both offer beekeeping classes as well. Just before we get into the panel, just so that people are aware that, if they just love what you're saying, that they have more resources where they can learn from you. Yes. And then, okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started with the bulk of questions. And again, just about that with their classes, those will be in the resources. So they both offer classes, and look forward to hearing more about that. So we'll just start off with why somebody might want to get started beekeeping. Very basic, simple question, but just to help get everyone's intentions kind of set for why they're here tonight. So we'll start with Natalie for that.
So if you want to go to slide number 6, I would say there's several reasons why you would want to start beekeeping. And one of the first one would be to pollinate your crops. And if you have a vegetable garden, if you have trees that have fruits, you will get 30 to 50% more yield in your crops. And the fruits or vegetables will be bigger and they will be better formed if you have bees pollinating your garden. And a single colony of bees can pollinate quite a bit of the area. They forage in a radius of 1 to 3 miles on average. So, your vegetable garden will be very happy, and so will you. So that's one of the reasons you might want to start with beekeeping. If you want to flip to the next slide, the production of, well, actually, everything got moved around. Apologize. Hang on a second. Let me find slide number 9 would be the next one. That would be your honey. Some people might be interested in actually getting some honey for themselves so that they can enjoy that and they can know exactly what's in their honey. So what pushed me to keep my own bees initially was, yes, a passion. I wrote a report when I was 8 years old and it stuck with me and I was fascinated, but also the ability to produce your own honey and knowing what's in it. There's been reports of fraudulent honey. It's the 3rd most fraudulent food in the world, really. So some of the local honey are not really local. They're imported, or they might be mixed with other cheaper honeys or rice syrups or high fructose corn syrup, especially if you go to the grocery store. But that's not the only thing. About 95% of beekeepers use pesticides in their hives to keep their colonies alive in the face of some pests. And that has a potential to get into your honey. And I didn't want any of that. So I didn't want to rely on grocery store honey. And I was like, I'm going to go and produce my own honey. So I know exactly what's in it, and it's really local and it's pesticide free. And then the other, if you flip one more, the other thing that you can do, you might produce some wax. And for the same reasons, you want pristine wax for lip balms or salves or skin products. You might want wax that's as pristine as possible. And this is the way to control that, by producing it yourself. You can make those beeswax wraps that everybody loves. You can make candles, you can make soaps, you can make furniture polish, you can make lip balms, all kinds of things. So wax is a great other purpose for this. The next one would be potentially other types of honey. So we talked about liquid honey, but you could also sell comb honey. I don't know if you, what I always tell people is that if they have never tasted comb honey, they haven't really lived because it's an experience like no other. And it's really honey straight from the hive that is exactly that, and nothing else. There's nothing else in there. And it's delicious. So the best way to do that is to have your own hive. And the next slide over, you could also make chunk honey. And then which is basically a piece of comb in liquid honey, which preserves it. And the next slide over, you can make creamed honey. So all kinds of honey products that you can use for yourself, or you can sell for paying for your addiction or for business. And then the next slide over, you could even, if you were totally addicted and interested in rearing local bees of genetics that you know will do great in the area, you could even sell your own bees. Right now, there's a shortage of supply in honeybees colonies, and the demand is so high that prices are skyrocketing. And so that's a great business model if you're a homesteader, for example, and you're trying to make a living with that kind of activity. So that's kind of my answer on that.
Thank you for that. I loved hearing all the different uses for honey and beeswax too, especially since this beekeeping panel is part of a homesteading series. And when you're homesteading, you need to make use of everything and use what you can. So, and then, yeah, did you want to?
I have one more reason to keep bees in Texas, especially if you have between 5 and 20 acres of land.
Oh, yes.
Use bees as an agricultural valuation on your land, just like having cows. Gets you a cheaper tax base. Bees can be used for that same purpose.
That's an excellent point, Dodie. I do that for a living, and I completely forgot to list that point.
I know. I was counting them off for you. It's like, oh.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of other reasons. I'm sure someone could talk for a whole hour about why you should raise bees. But we'll, yeah. We'll go on to the next question of just getting started. So now that we've decided we want to start raising bees, what items do you first need to buy? So you kind of mentioned, bees, there's a bee shortage. So maybe finding bees will be hard, but if you could talk about that, maybe just the average cost of starting as well. And then if there's a chance, you might actually have some things lying around in your house that you can use.
So I will start with how to get quote unquote freebies. And if you want to go to slide number 15, that's you would need a little bit of old wax or potentially some lemongrass essential oil. In this case, we're using bait or trap hives to kind of attract the swarm to the box that you want them to land into. So the superorganism every spring, if it's slide number 9, I think, 15, that's right. Yes, sorry. So the superorganism, the colony of honeybee, the method of reproduction is that they split themselves. If they have enough resources and they're thriving, they will cast a swarm where the old queen will leave with 50 to 75% of the bees in the colony, and they will search for a new home, leaving behind the old colony with the existing comb food and babies and a virgin queen that's in the making, so fresh queen. And they're going to go and take their chance at finding a new home. And you have a chance to catch those bees that are traveling as a group, which is called a swarm. And you can do that by baiting some hives. And in this case, we use the pulp pot, gardening pulp pot. This one is a tall one. It's I think it's 18 inches. I'm not sure the exact height, but you can just put a cover on it and the bees will enter the bottom of it. You suspend it in a tree, maybe add some old comb if you know a beekeeper that can share some with them. If you don't, you can use some lemongrass oil, and they tend to like these anyway. And you might get lucky and catch a swarm. So that would be a fairly cheap to free way to catch bees. That's for people to get started. The other way, if you want to go to the next slide, would be to purchase bees. If you don't want to rely, the chances of catching a swarm are not necessarily very high, especially if you don't have existing old equipment that smells like bees. On our website, we have a list of providers of treatment-free / natural survivor stock, natural bees, basically. in the US and Canada that you can go and visit and see who's close to you and purchase those bees. In Texas, there's several providers. What I would say is that if you care about your bees being resilient naturally without having to rely on pesticides to keep them alive, I would look in what is called survivor stock. And not all beekeepers, the vast majority of beekeepers that sell bees are selling treated bees. So you kind of want to keep that into consideration depending on your choices. If you want to treat, that's totally fine. You have more options. But this kind of map here on our website is going to lead you to people that do it naturally, if that matters. And buying bees is expensive. At that point, it's no longer free. These days, you can buy a package of bees, which is just a box with bees and a queen for about anywhere from $150 to $250 a colony. And if you are going with the more established baby colony, which is called a nuc colony or nucleus, NUC is a short, then you would need to spend a little bit more. It would come with comb, food, and babies and a queen, but it would cost you about an average of $100 extra compared to the package. That would give you, though, a better chance of success. So that would be the way to get bees if you're starting from scratch. If you're not starting from scratch, you can always get more bees by splitting and multiplying your existing colonies. So that's kind of where I would get.
If you're looking for bees and you're planning this out, it's good to think about ordering your bees in November or December, putting your name on the list, whether it's one of Natalie's survivor stock beekeepers, or if you have some other local beekeeper. A really good suggestion is to look for local clubs in your area and ask them for recommendations, because you really want a bee that's climatized to your area, that's used to living. I wouldn't want a bee from Wisconsin down here in Texas. Okay, they're just not. We've got enough little bee symbols down here in Texas that you can pick somebody local. So try to stay local. And I'm gonna plug Texas Bee Supply because Blake's my bud. So he's got a store on the north side of Dallas. He's got a store on the east side of Houston, and pretty soon he's going to have a store on the west side of Austin. So he can be local to just about everybody in Texas, and you can get bees from him. So once you find your place that you want to get your bees from, most of them will have like a drop-down menu. You want to pick the earliest time that is convenient for you to pick up your bees. So you're just kind of putting your name on the list in November and December, so that whoever you're purchasing from realizes, oh, okay, I need to make up some bees for this person by this time. And so pick an early delivery date. You really want to get your bees set up and in their house before the wildflowers start to bloom in your area. So maybe it's mid-March or early April, but as soon as you can get your bees, that's when you want to get them.
Great.
Well, and if I may, to Dodie's point, the earlier you order, the better off you are, because they do sell out really quickly. So if you order in the fall or in the early spring, know that you're still not going to get your bees until March, April when they become available. So you have to order way ahead of time if you don't want to find them sold out. The other thing I would ask is some questions as to the background of the bees. Are they treated? Are they not treated? How do you keep your bees? Where they raised? It all really matters, to Dodie's point, that they are local and grown locally. Yeah.
Great. I feel like that covers bees pretty well. What about the bee boxes and everything else?
I've got a good slide to start us off.
Okay.
So there are two main types of bee houses. It's probably up there, slide 1 or 2.
2.
Yeah, really early.
Is it this one?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Keep going. There we go, right there.
This, yeah. Okay.
So the main rule in Texas is that your bees are removable and inspectable. And that's the rule from the Texas Apiary Inspection Service. They're piece of government involved in beekeeping. Their job, though, is to make sure that all the bees in Texas remain more or less disease-free. And mostly the disease we're worried about is American foul brood. The good news is we've probably gotten rid of that disease. No, we haven't seen it in the bee population in such a long time. The other good news is there's only 3, about to be 4 apiary inspectors in all of Texas. So if you want to go out and try to figure out how to raise bees in a skep, nobody's going to come and hunt you down. Just realize that, probably don't advertise it. Just kind of do it in your backyard just for fun. The most beekeepers, I think, in Texas, you will use this a Langstroth hive on the left. That's kind of, I don't know, in my brain, when I think about a hive of bees, I always think of that stack of white boxes. The other option is a top bar, and Natalie's going to fill us in more on top bars, but they are awesome. They're really fun. They're a little bit more work, I think, getting started. But if you have any issues with weight, I would definitely suggest you go out and take a beekeeping class that actually gets you into hives, so that you can lift some of these boxes and see what's going to be right for you, and think about what's going to be right for you next year and 3 years from now and 5 years from now, that maybe you want to go ahead and start your beekeeping off with the thought that these boxes aren't going to get lighter year over year. You're just going to get weaker. So that also brings me to the mind that I've already started bringing my son out, and he helps me. So what a great opportunity to bring in a younger, stronger back to help you and to carry on the tradition. So Langstroth hives, if 10 frames is too big for you, then do an 8 frame. If you still like the Langstroth idea, but don't really want to do boxes, something kind of right in the middle of this is a long lang. So it's long like the top bar, but they're all frames, and they're frames all the way around frame, where the top bar is just 1 bar. There are other types of hives out there, and I know that Natalie has experience with those, so I'm going to let her carry on.
Yeah, so if you don't mind going back to slide number 7, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention in complement to what Dodie was saying. There you go. So those boxes, those Langstroths, they're called Langstroth boxes. They're really made for commercial beekeeping. They're used by the commercial beekeepers that are doing the pollination contracts. They take and move those hives all across the country to follow blooms of several crops, the most famous one being the almond bloom. We wouldn't have all those almonds and that almond milk and all those almond products if it wasn't for the commercial beekeepers that are taking their bees to California to pollinate those orchards. And it looks like this with a lot of these at the bottom right are on staging area, but they require stackability and standardization, so that they can all mix and match their equipment, their components. A lot of the time, the commercial beekeepers will feed them sugar syrup and pollen supplements, and it gets very complicated. It requires extracting. So if you're doing beekeeping for that reason, the Langstroth is probably going to be the best fit for your needs. Now, if we go to the next slide, if you're just wanting to enjoy beekeeping for yourself, for your homestead, make still quite a bit of honey, but be closer to nature and closer to your bees without all that equipment and without all the lifting, because it does get super heavy, anywhere between 40 to 80, sometimes 90 pounds that you have to lift. So to Dodie's point, it gets to be super heavy. And it's not as fun when you're hot in the summer, or you're not feeling well, or your back's hurting, or you're not as strong as a burly man, for example. The alternative would be the top bars. I'm not going to get into the details of all the different styles. There's plenty of styles that can fit homestead or backyard beekeeping, but like this example, each comb of bees is built off of a simple bar, a stick basically, and it's natural comb, and it allows you to do a lot of cut comb, a lot of honey as well, and it's a lot cheaper to make. So if we want to go to slide number 17 and push forward to slide number 17. Right there. There's the additional complexity of the vertical beekeeping that you need to take into account if you're going with Langstroth. You can get 8 to 10 frame to 5 frame. So here in the center, you have 5 frame to 8 frame to 10 frames. So they're not necessarily all compatible. You have to build frames. That's a lot of equipment that you have to invest in. It's quite expensive actually. And not everything matches if it's a different depth or a different width. So there's a complexity there. If we go to the next slide, it gets super heavy. I mentioned up to 80, 90 pounds. You crack those boxes open, you have bees that are wondering where their roof went. It can get a little quite intimidating for beginner beekeepers. The complexity of managing the brood nest through a couple of different vertical boxes gets really sometimes difficult. And then you have, if you forget to put a box on, then you have honey that's on top of the frames that can drip over your queens and drown them. So those are considerations that you want to keep in mind if you're going to go with the Langstroth vertical beekeeping. If we go to the next slide, it requires a whole lot of extra equipment that when you get started, you don't realize you have your boxes, but then you have to, when you're managing them, you have to store a lot of that equipment in your garage or in your warehouse in the winter, because you're not using half of that equipment when you condense back and harvesting is done. So there's a whole lot of space management to be done at that level. The complexity of managing vertically and horizontally at the same time can get a little unnerving. If we go to the next slide, the equipment tends to get old really fast because it's made out of thin wood. You have to juggle with a lot of frames. That's a lot of quite fragile and quite complicated parts, to be honest with you. And then if you're storing that equipment, that comb, over the winter, you might end up having wax moths destroying it or mice destroying it, and that can get a little unnerving as well. If we go to the next slide, I'm giving you all the reasons why, if you don't have to do Langstroth beekeeping, you might consider other options. The other aspect of vertical beekeeping, whether it's Langstroth or any vertical hive, is that you have a tendency in the winter for colder air to rise up, and the warm air that they need to stay warm to escape at the top or create condensation and drip back on them and kill them. In the summer, you have the opposite, where warmer air tends to overheat the top of that colony, and the cooler air they're trying so hard to keep inside to keep themselves cooler tends to escape at the bottom of the hive. So that chimney effect is very much in play in vertical beekeeping. If we go to the next one, the horizontal hive is a lot simpler. It's basically, the principle is that everything is done at waist level. Each bar is no more than about 7 to 8 pounds, even filled with honey, like this one, this beautiful comb on the right, which could get cut into cut comb because it's pure wax and honey. And all the bars are touching and they're contiguous. That forms the roof over the colony. So when you open it up, there's only very little space, and you don't have to expose the entire colony to you or to the air. And it's actually a lot less stressful to the colony because of that. Over that, there's usually a rain cover over the wood. If we go to the next slide, It's a lot lighter because of what I just mentioned. You can also, especially if you're doing homestead exemption, you can host 2 colonies in one horizontal hive, which you cannot really do very well in a Langstroth vertical hive. It's just very calm and easier to manage in a horizontal configuration because you know exactly where everything is in that colony. It's not spanning several boxes. I'm going to sell you on the horizontal hives here.
Yeah, this looks pretty easy and simple to make too, and maybe cheaper than buying all the boxes. So
do you want to go to the next slide? I want to show you exactly how easy it is. Oh, that was for another one. It's basically 5 parts, 5 pieces of wood for the hive body. It's a trough. And then 30 bars that are exactly the same, sticks of wood. And if you want, you can add legs. So if anybody wants the plans for to make their own for free, you can scan this code or go to our website. We're not here to sell you hives. We're here to show people how it is easy for homestead and backyard beekeeping to start with a horizontal tabar hive. And then what else was there that I wanted to show you on this? Let me see the slides. Oh yeah, next slide over is going to be pretty much all you need to build one. 2 or 3 boards of 2x10s, a piece of corrugated tin for the rain cover, and then some simple tools, table saw for the bars, and circular saw or compound miter saw, whatever you have in there. It's very easy to make those. If we go to the next one. It's so easy that we use them. I do a lot of community outreach for refugees, and we are able to build those for such a cheap investment, such a low investment, sometimes for free with scrap wood, or if you buy everything, $50 to $70 worth of equipment, of materials. And it's so easy that children can put them and assemble together. So that's something to consider as well. Next slide. I think that's, yeah. This is the horizontal expansion. This is why it's so easy, because you have a bird's nest in one area towards the front of the hive, and all the honey is at the back of the hive, which makes it super easy to harvest without bothering the bees, or to inspect and make sure that they're doing well without stressing them out. Because when you pull out frames and open up the whole colony, you let a lot of good temperatures, humidity, and antibacterial compounds just escape out in the air, and they have to recover. And with horizontal beekeeping, you don't have to do that. You get to preserve the bees and protect them from that stress, those stressors. So that's kind of my spiel on horizontal beekeeping out there.
And as you were saying, like before, about using scrap wood for this, you don't need to worry about different diseases because the main bee disease isn't around anymore. Is that correct?
You have to use non-treated wood because obviously pesticides or toxic chemicals, again, bees are very, very sensitive to that. The main issues that we have with beekeeping these days, and I know we'll get into it with colony collapse disorder, but there's mostly stressors, environmental stressors, lack of food, lack of nutrition, pesticides, exposure to fungicides and neonicotinoids, just stressors, but also there's pests. And one of the big ones is the varroa mites, which is the reason why a lot of the beekeepers out there put pesticides in their hives.
The one other thing though, when you're building these boxes, the bees are going to put propolis all around the edges of a propolis envelope. So they kind of surround themselves in antibacterial, antimicrobial, really good, like a big giant Band-Aid. So even if you do, as long as you don't use treated wood, the bees will take it and make it home.
Make it home. Cool. Let's say we're starting with this lovely horizontal beekeeping system. How many is this just one hive that you're starting with? Should, a beginner just kind of do one of these systems or have multiple? And could you just talk about, hives and spacing and how many you should start with?
Dodie, all right.
Let's start with Dodie this time. Yeah.
So I can talk about Langstroths, and then we'll let Natalie talk about
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
starting off with a top bar. So if you're starting off with a Langstroth hive, I would suggest 2 or 3. And you're not going to start with all of these boxes. You're just going to start with 1 box. And as your bee colony grows, then you might add another box. You can do small beekeeping. You can keep it just 2 boxes. I have several hives that are just 1 deep and 1 super, and they're fine. You can do 2 deeps and a super like this picture. That's a pretty common one. I don't need 2 deep boxes. I don't really want my colonies to be that huge. So I stick with 1 deep and 1 medium, and that's for my bees. And then I might have another super, that's the smaller box on top. And anything that they put in that top box, I consider that rent. So that's mine. They can keep whatever honey they put in the bottom and whatever honey they put in their second story. But anything past that is mine to take from. So that's my beekeeping. That's how I do it. Everybody has different goals and has different ways to beekeep, and there aren't too many wrong ways. There are lots of right ways. So I would suggest more than 1 colony to start with, because you don't know if this colony is doing good unless you have another colony to compare it to. And the more colonies you can start with, 2 or 3, is good, because if something happens to one of them, you've still got bees. And if something's happening here, say you accidentally squashed your queen and they don't have the resources to make a new queen, you can take babies and eggs from another one and put it in this hive, and they'll create a queen. So you can share your resources between each other. So being able to compare and being able to share resources are 2 good reasons to have more than 1 colony. And depending on what your goals are, if you just want to have 1 or 2 for the backyard, or even just 1 for the backyard, you're going to find friends that are also beekeepers that if you need to in a crunch, you'll be able to share resources with, because lots of beekeepers use Langstroths. Even if all of your friends are top bar beekeepers, if their bars are the right size or can be made to fit in your Langstroth with maybe adding extra screws or an extra piece of wood to the edge, you can even share resources with top bars. So both colonies are good. Starting off with more than 1 is a good option if you can. Spacing, they can be, you saw the picture of the semi. You saw the bees in staging. Commercial beekeepers put 4 bees on a pallet or 4 hives on a pallet. So spacing is fine. Do what feels good for you. What's best for the bees is to have them a little bit spaced out, maybe have their entrances a little bit different, so that they get used to, oh, this is my house. I go in this way. If they're all in a straight line and flat, and it's like, oh, which house was mine? It was over here on this end. And you get something called drifting. But if they're spaced out a little bit, maybe 5 feet or maybe 2 of them in between a couple of cinder blocks, lifted up to, so that you're not having to bend all the way down to work them. Bees aren't as fussy, so they're happy. Bees are. So go ahead, Natalie, tell us about top bars.
Yeah, we'll go back to that.
Actually, I couldn't agree more with what you've said about it all depends on your goals, and everybody has different goals. So make sure that you choose the right hive for the type of goals that you have. Are you wanting to sell honey? Are you wanting to go transport your hives? The top bar is not very easily transportable, for example. So if you're going to commercial beekeeping, you probably wouldn't want to go with a Langstroth hive. It's much more transportable. The number of colonies, I couldn't agree more with Dodie. You want more than one if you can afford it. By saving on your hive body, your boxes, you can splurge and get more bees. That's another advantage. The top bar hives, the horizontal configuration allows you to put a center partition in a box and put entrances on both sides, so you can have 2 colonies. And that allows you to have, if you wanted 4 colonies, you could have 2 of these top bar hives split in the middle. And that's really something, like Dodie said, it's good to have more than 1 or 2 colonies. I think that the good number to start is anywhere between 2 to 4. With my preference would be recommending 4, because you get more opportunities to help colonies in difficulty, because you also have more opportunity to visit in your colonies without being as stressful, meaning you don't want to spend too much time in each colony. You don't want to go too deep in each colony. And if you have only one, you don't want to go too often. So if you have only one, you're going to be tempted to go in there too often. What I recommend is each colony shouldn't be visited more than 2, 3, and actually I think it's better every 4 weeks. And so that's something to keep in mind. The other aspect of this is that you want to make sure that well, especially if you have ag valuation, that's something that you want to keep in mind. I was going to say something and I forgot, so it will come back to me later.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure it'll come back. We'll just talk about the hives a little bit more, about where you put them in relation to your house, or let's say people have gardens as well. Do you want to put your bees right by your garden? Is there a concern about the house? Will they start colonizing your house? I don't know. We'll start with Dodie again for this question, I guess.
Okay. So look at your house. Don't put your beehive in your dog run. Don't put your beehive in between you and your chicken coop or your back door shed or where you keep your lawnmower. You want it to be kind of tucked away out of the way. If you have a big fence, putting it right up against, or not right up against, but close to the back fence so that the bees have to go out and then up to fly away, that's great. Then you get them out of your yard, and then as they're coming back home, they'll hit your garden. You don't really want your beehive in your garden because you want to get in your garden and pick and plant and play with your plants and not have to worry about bees all the time. If your beehive is right there and you're in their flight path to leave their house, then you're going to have not as much fun in your garden. So they'll get back to your garden. Try not to put them in your garden, okay? And think about your neighbors. You kind of, it depends on if you have an HOA or any city ordinances or anything like that, and you want to be a nice neighbor. Go around and give all your neighbors honey. I wouldn't tell them that you have honeybees. I would just gift them with honey. And if they ever complain, there's, you don't have a brand on that bee. We're not really sure it belongs to your hive. Try to stay nice about it with your neighbors. Try not to cause a fuss, especially if there are rules that say that you can't have bees, because then you might have to look for some other place to locate your bees. But hopefully homesteaders and you've got some property so you can put your bees out there. I would make sure that I could get to them, turn around and come back, especially if I had to drive or if I had a 4-wheeler or something. Even after heavy rains, I would want to face them towards the east or the southeast so that they get first early morning sun. You kind of got to wake them up and tell them get out and get to work, and that's their cue. In the wintertime, if they are anywhere near, sometimes we put a windbreak up if they're like on a hill or something. You want a windbreak so that the north wind doesn't just come in and blow them over all the time. Lots of people go into a tree line so that they have afternoon shade. The more shade you get, though, the more likely you'll get a pest called the small hive beetle. So my bees are all in full sun all day long, and it makes it tougher on me, but it's better for the bees. They like their nest to be 95, 96, 97 degrees. They like it warm, keeping their babies warm. So most of the year, they're actually heating their hive. They don't start air conditioning it until we get, over or up to 100 degrees. And for that, they need to have a really easy, nearby source of water. Let's see, that covers a lot. Natalie, do you have anything else to add?
I just remember what I was going to say earlier. You want to start with two. If you're going to start with multiple colonies, don't start with one of each. Start with type of hives. Start with the same type of hive so that you can exchange those resources. So if you do one experiment with both Langstroth and the horizontal Taba hive, I would get two of each so that you can spare resources if needed and help the other colony. The other thing that I wanted to add to what Dodi's already explained that is you want to make sure you have water source available on the property, preferably or nearby. Bees go through a whole lot of water in the heat of the summer to try. They process, they dilute their honey, and they also use it for the swamp cooler effect inside the hive. They will spray some water and ventilate it to create some cool exchanges of heat and cool. And if they don't have water sources, they will go and pester your dog water bowl, your neighbor's pool, and you're not going to be happy, or they will be struggling because this very demanding for them to go further to get that water. So set up a good water source. Bees don't swim, so you want to make sure there's floaters or rocks or plants that they can climb on. If you have a pond, that's all the better because they like that dirty water. But in a pinch, you could use a dog water bowl and an autofill with some rocks in it so that they can land and drink off. And by the way, that helps all kinds of insects. That can help native bees. That can help colonies of bees around you. And you can make it pretty, or you can make it very simple and cheap. So there's that. Like Dodi said, if you are keeping Langstroth, you might have to go and transport heavy equipment. And so having a path where you can drive potentially, or have a little cart that you can take there, it gets pretty heavy. If you have a top bar, it's not as important because basically the bar goes right back into the box. You don't have any equipment to transport back and forth. So that's kind of a couple considerations with that, in addition to what Dodi's already said. Oh, and airflow. You want to make sure in the heat of Texas, especially if you keep them in the sun, that you create some airflow above the hives and over whatever the boxes are. That's true for both styles of hives. You want to maximize that airflow underneath the lid. I create a secondary lid on the Langstroth to have airflow over the entire hive. And the Taba hive, if you have a system that has enough airspace, that's very important in the heat of Texas.
Yeah, since y'all are talking about water and temperature, I also just wanted to ask, should people be concerned at all about where they live if it gets too hot or if it gets too cold about beekeeping, or can bees really handle that temperature well? Different temperatures just as well. Yeah.
There are bees from the tip of Canada down to the bottom of Florida. There's bees are everywhere. So yeah, but that is something else. You do want to make sure that you've got a bee that is climatized. So don't get, like I said, don't get bees from Washington State. Get them from Texas. They'll do better. And for the water source, bees only have, if you think about it, like miles on a tire, bees are only going to fly about 500 miles. And at that point, their wings are going to be so tattered that they can't make it back home. So I know, sad. So don't make them fly really far for their water. Give them some water close. Don't make them work for that.
Yeah, that's exactly true. The closer it is, the better it is. You don't want it as close as 30 feet of your hive and not in front of their line of flight, because believe it or not, as soon as the foragers, the bees that are old enough to go and fetch food, come out of the hive, and especially in the spring after confinement during the winter, they will relieve themselves. And so they know to not take that water that's right there in front of their hive. That's a little interesting tidbit that you want to keep in mind where to place your water sources.
Exactly. Just like birds leaving their nest.
Mhm.
This is the poop zone, and then beyond. So
Ants do that too. They make little
Right.
waste piles outside. Do bees do that? Make waste piles outside their hives, or not really? Kind of.
Not by design.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can definitely tell when they've been cooped up for a really long time and they get to get loose for the first time in a while. You can definitely tell where they
Right. Yeah, speaking of cooping up, so we've talked about the summer. During the winter, what do people do with their hives? How is beekeeping different in the winter season?
Well, hopefully you've taken care of your bees. So like for me, we extract our honey around July 4th. And then July 5th, I start thinking about winter. So that's when you start thinking about getting your bees through winter. What all do I need to do to make sure that they have everything they need? Because when it gets colder than 55 degrees, they don't fly. Plus, there's nothing out there for them to get pollen or nectar from. Nothing's blooming. So you've got to get it all into their houses, into the colonies, into the hives before that time. So maybe you don't take all of that honey. So one of the questions was, how much honey am I going to get my first year? Don't plan on getting a whole lot your first year. Think maybe one bar or maybe one frame. Even when I stole my first frame, I took it back and took a couple of scrapes off of it, and then I gave it back to them. I was so worried. So don't plan on getting a whole lot of honey your first year, because your bees are using all of the carbohydrates that they would normally put into honey into producing wax and getting themselves established and making their brood nest, because you want a big bunch of bees. The more bees you have, the more space they take up, the more easily it is for them to manage their resources. They don't move around a lot in the hive when it gets really cold. They kind of do this. So if their food is here and the ball of bees is this big, then they'll get that food on the outside edges. But if your colony is small, they could starve to death and there could be honey right beside them. But because they're so small, so you want a big population of bees going into winter. You want to have a lot of food in there already. A lot of beekeepers close their bees up. Some even put them in kind of cold storage. Blake's bees go into cold storage through the wintertime. So they found the optimum temperature where they will eat just enough. They don't go into total torpor. They don't hibernate, but they're not so active that they're eating a whole lot. So they've got the exact right temperature and they make it through winter. My bees live in Round Rock in their boxes, so they go out and forage anytime it's warm enough, even though there's nothing out there for them to eat. It's just kind of ingrained in them to go fly and look for food. You have to manage how much food is in their box, but you don't go in and open it up and look at it. It's a whole lot easier during the colder months because you're not opening up. You're just hoping that you did it all right. And on warmer days, doing quick peeks.
Okay.
I would
Good
say,
to
I
know.
would say as a rule of thumb, don't harvest honey unless they have a surplus. And the rule of thumb is about one frame of brood babies or bees and one frame of honey, and anything that's maybe like 1.5 frame of honey. And then anything that they have extra after that is considered potentially surplus. Of course, the less you harvest, the better off they are, because they're going to need that amount of food for the winter. You don't want to feed them pollen supplements, because then they'll have more mouths to feed throughout the winter and go through their food. So you leave them alone if you know that you haven't over harvested. And yes, in your first year, that's a bad idea to harvest hardly anything. If you want to look at the slide number 29, this is how we harvest honey, by the way, in the Tabar hive.
Yeah, I would say let's look at honey harvesting, and then I just want to cover on this slide we can actually talk about gear just quickly, and then smoke, and then we'll move over on to other questions. But yeah, let me get this screen up.
Yeah, that slide.
Mhm.
This is Les Crowder. And what he did is he pulled out a bar out of a top bar hive, and the bees build the wax straight off the bar, and the honey is stored there. So all he does is that he lifts it out of the hive, cuts it out in a bucket, which if he takes good care of it and brings the whole comb in a more protected fashion in a mini transport hive, he can take the whole comb and do comb honey. But here he's planning on extracting it by crush and strain. So he's putting it all in a bucket and closing it, and then he puts that bar right back into the hive. So there's nothing to take home but just honey. So that makes it a lot easier to transport from that standpoint. When you're doing the Langstroth, especially if you're doing at a larger scale, you're going to have the opportunity to use an extractor. But if you're doing horizontal tabar with natural comb, you can do crush and strain, which I think is the next slide over. You can use very simple kitchen utensils like a potato masher to crush, or you can take your hands, wash them well, or wear gloves and crush that to break the seal of the cells of honey, and then let it strain over a container that you can find in your kitchen, or you can use a bucket, a food grade bucket, a nylon type of filter, or even a paint strainer, a brand new paint strainer, to hold back all the bigger pieces of wax and pieces of bees, sometimes in impurities, and it will strain straight into your bucket or your jars. If you're using a bucket, a honey gate is a great idea. But you can do that with things that you find in your own kitchen at that point. So do you want to talk about extracting for Langstroths?
Yeah.
If you have a Langstroth, then you're going to pull out one of those frames. There should be a pretty picture of a Langstroth hive of honey, a frame of honey. And you can use a fork.
Number 5, slide number 5, towards the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, it's up at the beginning.
About to.
You can use a fork from your kitchen, or you can go all the way up to using an electric knife that's really hot, that it just goes right across the edge of the frame, and it takes the top off, and then all the honey will drain out. So you could just tilt them in a bucket and let the honey just pour out with gravity. Or you can, as Natalie said, put them in an extractor. If you join a bee club, lots of bee clubs have extracting equipment that they'll loan out to you for the weekend or for the week. So you don't have to purchase an extractor for something you're only going to use 1 or 2 days out of the year. So I'd highly recommend that. If you are using Langstroths, if you are using frames, save your money for the first 3 years. If you're still doing this in year 4, then you've saved 3 years worth of money, and you can afford to buy an electric extractor. And depending on how big your operation is, they have 2 frame extractors up to 100 and something frame extractors. So, get whatever size is going to work for you. You do have to, we go out with a big bucket and I pull frames at a time instead of whole boxes. Commercial beekeepers or honey producers might pull a whole box at a time. So you do what works for you and your goals. I look for the frames, and if that frame is good, I might shake off all the bees and put it in a bucket and put the lid on the bucket, and then have another frame that I can put right back in there. A lot of times we just scoot them all together and stick them in the middle, and after we've extracted our honey from those frames, we'll bring them back and put them back in the hives again. They're called wet frames. And then the bees just have a little party because it's like, oh, look at all this wax and all this honeycomb and all this yummy honey that's dripping. And they'll go in and really clean it all up, get any little bits of drops, and they'll reposition it in just the middle maybe, or maybe in other frames. It's not that much harder if you decide that you want to do foundationless frames. You can use, you have that pretty frame there, and you can just chunk and have 3 blocks of honeycomb. That's the way I grew up eating honey too, with both of my grandfathers bringing it. It was on the table right next to the biscuits, every Sunday morning. So a big chunk of honeycomb. So, and I got into beekeeping with that in mind. That's what I want to have again, that chunk of honeycomb. So I use this with foundationless frames and let them build something that looks just like that picture. And cut that into 3 squares and eat it.
Great.
And
Thanks.
to Dodie's point, I would say, yes, if you want to avoid not only the expenditure of the extractor, but also the space it takes to keep it, to store it, relying on your local beekeeper club that has landing equipment very often is a good idea.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Just briefly before we move on to the listener questions, I realized, as we're talking about extracting the honey, we need to talk a little bit about some of this gear and also the smoker. So maybe if you could just spend 2 minutes just touching on whether you need this stuff and where you get it and such.
Go ahead, Natalie.
Okay, so I will give you the quick and dirty. You need to always protect your face. That's the minimum requirement. So a simple hat, and Dodie picked a really cool cowboy hat. You can get a insect netting, a mosquito netting that you could put over any of your favorite hats. As long as it doesn't touch your face, that net will protect you from the bee stings. And that's what I would say is the minimum requirements. Now, if you don't feel comfortable with wearing just that for protection, you can go and get a jacket with a veil. You have round veils, you have fencing veils like the one picture here, or you can go even further and get a full suit like this gentleman is getting. In Texas, I would highly recommend something that is ventilated because it gets super hot. It gets expensive, but it's a very good investment in your protection and your comfort at that point. The gloves, you have the traditional lamb skin or cow skin leather gloves at the top here. You can use those. I find them very cumbersome. First, they attract stings because they're animal skin, and the bees evolved to sting mammal skins. Also, they retain the smell of the stings that signals to their sisters that they can come and sting right there. They don't stop all the stings. They're very bulky, and they prevent you from really working your bees without crushing them, which really angers and stresses them out. However, I would say it depends on your goals. Again, if you're a commercial beekeeper and you don't have time for any of this, you just kind of, throw those on and keep and come and go. If you're wanting to be a little bit more delicate, or if you want something that's a little less bulky, the kitchen dishwashing gloves that Dodie has, I love those. That's a very good way to protect your hands while retaining the dexterity. It's also washable. It doesn't retain the alarm pheromones that the bees will place when they sting, and they are hard to get stung through, especially the thicker ones. Or you can go barehanded, and then you can smoke your hands and move slow. That's the important thing. You just don't want to jolt and irritate the bees. So it all depends with your level of comfort, but always cover your face. And also I would say use like Dodie has those beautiful little yellow with bees boots. Cover your ankles. Even if you're wearing a full suit, you're going to want to cover those ankles because they will go for them. Don't wear anything dark, black or red. They see it as black and they tend to attack those colors. So that's why anything lighter colored, you can wear a long sleeved shirt and long sleeve, long bottom pants and boots, and be well protected if you have at least a veil on your face.
Yes, and it's called personal protective equipment. So you dress to your level of comfort, and say you're getting more comfortable. Maybe you want to go barehanded, or you want to go from a whole big long suit to just a jacket, or not a jacket at all, just long sleeves. But it's all up to you, and you do it to your comfort level so that you're able to go into all of your hives.
Mm-hmm. And the situation, have always a backup. If you're going with minimal protective gear, have a backup of a jacket or gloves or something else in case the bees get upset.
Yeah.
And this smoke, you mentioned smoking your hands. This is a smoker, right? So that's just to calm the bees down. Is that kind of correct? Or
so two tools that you need to have are a hive tool, and that's a J hook. I like my J hook because I can get in between and pick up my frames with those. If you're going to pry in a Langstroth box, pry against the thing that's less expensive, not the side of the box, but the side of the other frame. So that's why I like the J hook. There's other kinds of prying tools, and you need a prying tool even with a top bar because the bees are going to use propolis, which is really a sticky substance. It's made from tree saps and other plants, and it sticks things together. So you would even need it on a top bar to pry the bars up sometimes. And definitely you need it with a Langstroth to pry your boxes apart and sometimes even your frames out. The smoker, what it does is it hides the alarm pheromone. So it was talking about getting stung on your hands, or making it so that alarm pheromone is not readily available for the bees to smell. So you're disrupting the smells by throwing smoke on them. And pheromones is how they communicate. They communicate everything with pheromones, different smells, because if you think about it, they're in a big dark box. They can't see each other. So they don't see that waggle dance that's going on. They smell the pheromones from the bees' feet and follow the dance. The babies have a certain smell. Everybody loves the smell of babies, including bees. So that's a different pheromone. There's pheromones for everything. And the alarm pheromone is what we're trying to disrupt here. So as long as we can disrupt their communications, the one that says sting here, then that's what the smoke is for.
Yep, and you can smoke at the entrance before you get started, and a little bit as you open up the box, and then you should be good. And the only other reason you might want to use the smoker at that point is as a herding tool to get the bees away from where you don't want them, because they don't like that smell necessarily. They will run from it. And so very gentle puffs. You don't want to overwhelm the colony with too much smoke, because otherwise they might actually get really mad at you.
Yeah, and you don't want your honey to smell like smoke. Really good honey connoisseurs can smell if you over smoke your honey.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I really wanted to cover honey and how to make that craft, be crafty with your honey, but maybe we'll cover that after we get into a few questions. I just want to start seeing what people were asking. But I did want to put these resources up just these last 3 slides that y'all put together,
So for
for people
beekeeping.
to see, some more books that,
So the one on the left, the beginning beekeeping, has a lot of pictures. The one on the middle is great for natural beekeeping. And the one on the right has a lot of information, including about treatments.
Great. And then, oh,
This is for people that are wanting, if you are interested, this is my plug. If you're wanting to learn how to become a beekeeper, and especially are focused on natural beekeeping for homestead, or how to create a business with your beekeeping, we have an apprenticeship that you can scan the code at the top or go to our website and just kind of register there.
okay. I'll make sure, yeah, we'll get into more promotions again after after the questions, just to end on that kind of note. But let's see what I've been sent in. Okay, people, here's a question from Deborah. Do we need to ensure we have adequate pollination plants year round for the bees?
So you have a slide over there. If you go back to that slide.
Oh.
It's a very important question, and I'm going to let Dodie take her turn on that because it's critical. But you do, and you want to plant for the entire year, and you want to plant a mix of flowering plants, bushes, and trees. Planting a tree is like an acre in the sky for the bees. There's a lot of tiny little flowers, and it's a one-stop shop. So it's a really efficient way for them to forage. However, it takes longer. So while you plant these, they will flower later down the road, start planting bushes, and these will take longer to flower than the flowering plants and the wildflowers. The wildflowers are awesome, but they're only going to be flowering for a couple, 3 weeks, and then that's it. And there's the least efficient way to feed bees. But if you go to that plant list, you will find it on our website, and it will tell you the plants that you could use, not only for the honeybees, but for native bees as well, and their blooming time, and more information in the links as well. So it was
pull that up. Yeah.
Yeah, that
There
one.
we go.
So same
Yeah.
thing, if you go to our website, you can find that list, or you can scan the code. I don't know if it will scan here, but Dodie, what's your take on this?
Definitely plant. I like trees more than anything because, like you said, it's a whole bunch. So also, as you are planting bushes and flowers, plant more than one. They like clusters more than the single little plant. So, plant a row of trees, plant a row of bushes, line your walkway, whatever. Natalie did a great job with this document. You can also look at the ladybird, wildflower. Go to your local nursery and look and see what plants the bees are flying towards and landing on, aside from your flowering trees and your fruit trees and your stuff like that. Just look and see what the bees are landing on. So that's a great. And yeah, there is something blooming in Texas that has pollen almost year round. There's not as many nectar plants, but that, they make their honey. Even if all they get are those 3 weeks, they can make a whole lot of honey. In Texas, we usually have a spring honey flow is what it's called, when all the wildflowers are blooming. And then we have one in the fall. And if you think about all the plants in the fall, the yellow mustards and the
goldenrod.
The goldenrod, yeah. And then there's another one called snow on the prairie or snow on the mountain, a little white flower. You'll just see it out in the pastures and the fields. So there's a really good fall honey flow for the bees. Most beekeepers will collect their honey in the springtime and leave that fall flow for the bees for winter. Goldenrod honey doesn't smell good. I'm not sure if it tastes good because I've never been able to get past the smell. The smell is kind of like, say, sweaty socks, locker room, sweaty smell. And also the snow on the prairie and snow on the valley. The little white flower has it's a burning kind of flavor on your tongue, like a chemical burn, not a heat burn, a chemical burn. So it's better for the bees than it is for you. So once that plant starts blooming, if you have it within your bees foraging 3 to 5 acres, 3 to 5 miles, then you probably have lost that honey to the bees anyway, because that's not something you want to put into jars.
Yep. And to Doty's point, go to your local nursery. Your plants need to be adapted to your local area. If you go to the big box stores, chances are they might not be. And also chances are much higher that they will be treated with neonicotinoids or all kinds of things. So keep that in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think that answers that question. Somebody else is asking, let's see. What is considered to be nearby within a couple of 100 feet? I think she's talking about in terms of your house, in relation to your house. Anyone can jump in for the questions.
I would say if you're trying to ask about placement of your hives, you could have them on your front porch if you wanted to, but know that the inspection becomes a lot more tricky, and they might get upset at your visitors. So it's up to you and your comfort level. But I would say if you want them, I would put them in the back. I would put them away from the house and 200 feet at minimum if you're bothered by the bees, and just kind of put them where you're the most comfortable with. Understanding that if your water source is past your pool from the hive, then they might go to your pool first. So place them in conjunction to your water source as well.
Yeah, make sure that water is before they get to the pool.
Okay. Someone else is asking about when is the best time to put out the traps to catch free bees?
Now.
Yes.
Now you want to put them up now. Find a local beekeeper that might be willing to share some old comb with you and kind of give you the basic tips for getting that set up properly with the highest chances of success.
Okay, Ronnie. Oh, yeah.
There's something you can spray in your box. It's called Swarm Commander. Put a very little bit, like dip a Q-tip in there, put a little bit around the edge, and then drop a Q-tip in the back. And it's the same as the lemongrass oil. It's a little bit stronger. What it is it smells like a honeybee queen. So it's her pheromone, again, and with the pheromones. But it's something you can buy if you can't find the lemongrass oil, or if you don't have any luck with the lemongrass oil. So it's another tool.
It helps you to catch swarming bees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ronnie is asking about how do you keep fire ants out of your bees? And that kind of just brings up a good question about pests, other insects in general. So
ants are not necessarily a pest of a strong colony. A strong colony should keep most of the pests at bay. That includes the small hive beetles, that includes the wax moths, that includes the ants. If you do have an issue and you really are concerned about the ants as your colony is struggling, then I would recommend using depending on the stands that you're using, some bath of mineral oil, covered with some kind of cover to protect it from the rain, to create a barrier for the ants to come up. Or you can use a mechanical barrier as well in the form of that product called Tanglefoot. It's like a sticky resin. It's organic, and you put it around the legs of your stands or your hives, and that will stop the ants from crawling up there.
I haven't ever had any issues with ants. If they build on the side, like on the legs, or maybe on, if I have cinder blocks down, if they start to build on the side of the cinder block, I'll do something to move them from there. But bees don't normally walk around. If you see bees walking, then the bees are sick. So however you would normally treat your ants, it shouldn't affect your bees at all. Bees don't walk around, so they wouldn't get into any kind of, I mean, you know, if you use the dishwashing soap and, you know, go ahead, Natalie, you got a thought?
I was gonna say there's also, you can do little water bottles with a solution of sugar and boric acid with little holes, and they will take that boric acid solution back to the queen and kill the colony. So you can make traps where the bees cannot get in, and the holes are small enough for the ants. You just put them on the ground, and the ants will come and help themselves and kill their own colony.
There you go.
Okay. Speaking of dying ants, no, that's sad. Someone's asking about the lifespan of a box of bees. And then also, I'll just tack on to that question. What kind of bees do y'all have? And they also are asking about Russian bees. So there's 2 questions.
I guess I will start. I have local survivor stock bees, meaning I let my bees grow in the area. I let them mate with drones from the area. I have had some Russians because I was curious as well. They're supposed to be more resilient. I find that the local bees just do just as well. They're very adapted to the local cycles of weather and forage, and are less stressed by it. They will build up when they need to. They will contract when they need to. I don't like Italians personally. Again, it all goes back to, it's all a matter of personal preferences and goals. It's up to you how you want to keep bees. Just, you know, I would advise getting the most resilient possible bees, and that, you know, if they're resistant to pests and tolerant of the viruses that they transmit, you're better off. They will be stronger and survive more. And I forget what the other question was. So.
I remember, so I'll do it. You have in your colony 3 different castes of bees. You've got a queen. She can live 3 to 5 years. The problem is she's only going to be viable laying eggs like she should be that first and maybe part of that second year. Because our commercial beekeepers, this is just my thought, because our commercial beekeepers are constantly replacing their queen every year, the longevity of our queens has shrunk. So it's going to be up to us small scale beekeepers, not the commercial guys, to keep our queens as long as they're viable. We want to be that positive influence that helps expand their life cycle. So I wait until my queen is all laid out. And it's just like chickens, right? They lay, and then they lay smaller and smaller eggs. So you'll notice the same thing with your queens. And as they get to that part, it's time to replace your queen. Your next bee in your box are your boys. They're drones. They last 1 season or until they get lucky. Drones' only job is to mate with a queen, not their own queen, but the queen from another colony. So they take off every afternoon for the local bee bar, called the drone congregation area, and they just fly in a big circle looking for a queen. If they don't find one, then they come home and they eat the honey and hang out on the couch and don't do anything else. But the next day they leave again for the bee bar and circle around and look for a queen. If they get lucky, they mate and drop to their death because they leave a most important part of themselves with the queen. Okay, so until they'll only live a season, because then if they keep coming home, when we get to our first cold snap, you'll find a little pile of dead bees in front of your colony and think, oh no, what's going on? Look at them really closely, and they're all boys. So what they've done is all the worker girls have shoved them all out, herded them all up and shoved them out, because they didn't help us collect any of this food, and we don't need what they have to offer during winter. We don't need any more babies right now, no more mouths to feed, so out you go. The boys will all bundle up in a little cluster and try to stay warm. And if they stay warm over that night, they'll crawl back in the house the next day. But again, the girls will gather them all up and shove them out. So the first really cold night, they'll freeze and fall. So there'll be a little pile of dead bees. So that's the year for the boy. The other one in our colony is a worker bee, and she's a girl, and she does all the work. She cleans her cell out. She cleans the other cells out. becomes a nurse bee when she runs into some babies and starts taking care of babies. She spends the first half of her life in the house, in the hive as a nurse bee, as a house bee. The second part of her life, she spends outside as a forager. So she brings in water, she brings in pollen, she brings in nectar. And then the very end of her life, because she knows she only has one sting to give, she'll guard the front door. So she'll either die stinging somebody, or she'll die because she's been flying and gathering pollen and nectar and bringing it home, and her wings have just worn out. So 3 types of bees, 3 different lifespans. But your box of bees, hopefully, you keep them forever. You might replace your queen every couple of years. Your worker colony, your worker population is going to be replacing itself constantly. We have summer bees and winter bees. In the summertime, because they only fly 500 miles, their average lifespan is 4 to 6 weeks. And those drones only live a season. The worker bees in the wintertime will live through 3 months because they're not flying as much. So your winter bees, your winter worker bees last a lot longer than the summer bees.
You got to cycle out your combs if you're going to keep that colony alive, because it gets dirty with generations of bees.
Yes, that's true. As the babies, as the queen lays, the life cycle of the bee is they make a cocoon in there, and as that cocoon is just going to make it darker and blacker and nastier, and you don't really know what your bees are out in the wild walking on, and they're going to bring all of that in. And as your comb gets nasty and dirty, with the top bar, you're just chopping it off every couple of years and making them build it again. With the Langstroth, you just move it to the outside edge a little bit at a time. And then in the winter, that's insulation. And then the very first part of spring, you take those out and you give them brand new ones. You put it by the brood nest, and suddenly they feel like, oh, we've got room, so we don't have to swarm. So you won't catch us freebies out there because our beekeeper took care of us and gave us some more space.
Thank you for that. I studied ecology, and so I love hearing about bee life cycles and such. Super interesting. Let's see, another question. Someone's asking about if you have to eventually clean out the supers. Is that how you say it?
The supers with the honey?
I think that they maybe mean, do you have to change them out? Like exchange the supers, or?
Well, when you pull them off because you've extracted and you extract the honey from them. When your population shrinks, you take them away and you store them. Since you've taken them away from the bees, it's your responsibility now to take care of them so they don't get that nasty wax moth or any other pests, any other issues. You keep them safe since you took them away from the bees. But because the bees' population has gotten smaller because of winter, they can't guard all of that. So they can't keep the wax moths away, or the small hive beetles, or maybe whatever pest might be the issue. So you want to keep your colony size as small as your population. So you don't keep that big tall hive of boxes all year long. It goes with the population of your bees. Just like in a top bar, you've got a follower that you can close it up if you need to. Make it smaller. Because they can't guard it all, and you want it to be just so big for them to keep the temperature, the right temperature for them as you're going into winter. So you might take that box away after you've extracted honey, after they've cleaned it up, and then in spring when they're about to go through a honey flow again, you'll give it back to them, and they don't have to build the wax again because that's really resource intensive. So they'll just fill it full of honey. So your second year of beekeeping, when they've already built out all that wax, all they're going to do is store honey for
Well, I hope that that answered their question. We'll do 2 more questions. Rebecca says that she has everything but the bees. She used to keep 9 boxes. If I put sugar, water, and food in the boxes, will bees come back?
No.
So they will want to rob that and use it for food. And typically they don't want to use the restaurant as their home. And so that's probably going to be a good indicator for them to not come there initially anyway for nesting and catching swarms. However, there's some research out there that says that in the long term, there's a certain memory that's continuous with the colony, and they might come back later in 3 to 4 weeks and just kind of visit it again. And if there's no food, then they will remember that place. So there might be a chance then that you would catch. But if you're trying to catch them right there and then, putting the food in there is the worst thing. They're not going to want to move in.
If you have any old comb still, put a frame of old comb in there. If you don't have that, put some frames in there. If you have Dr. Seeley has done great research that the size of a deep box is the exact size that they're looking for out in the wild to build their home in. Here's some pretty comb.
This is old comb.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross. This is even grosser. This is like
Yeah.
really dark, but it smells really like something the bees want.
Yeah. So put that in there and it will attract them in, and they'll notice that, oh, it's just the right size. And what'll happen is your scout bees will find it. They'll go back and tell the rest of the bees. And once everybody has decided that this is their house, they'll come and that's called a swarm, and they'll move in. Once you start seeing them bring pollen into what you're calling your swarm trap, then you know you've got them, because they feed the pollen to the babies. They need the pollen for the babies. Once there's babies in there, nobody leaves babies. Everybody loves babies.
All right,
So
we'll do.
Try to use your box as a swarm trap, but don't put food in it.
We'll do one last question on the live stream. Abel asks, in your first year and just beginning, how often, if ever, do you need to get into the hive or need to suit up to interact with the bees?
So it depends a little bit on the type of hive also. It depends on this. So you don't want to go when it's too cold. You don't want to go when it's too hot, when there's weather coming. You want to, if you've got wax only and no foundation, you probably want to go a little bit more at the beginning. It depends if it's a package. If it's a package of just bees, a building, then you probably want to go a couple of weeks after you've installed them to make sure they're not building wonky comb if they're on natural wax. If you're installing a nuke, it comes with straight combs already, and then you can wait a little bit longer. You don't want to go when it's a period of a nectar flow, because you set them back quite a bit. You don't want to go too often, even in a dearth, because then they're going to fight and rob each other from their own resources. They're like sharks in the water. They'll smell that honey and they'll know that box is open and undefended in a sense. And so you want to kind of limit your visits at that point. You never want to go in too long and too deep into the colony unless you have a specific reason for it. And I would say, as a general rule of thumb, when you get set up, every 2-3 weeks is a pretty good frequency. And it doesn't need to be much more than that as far as I'm concerned. But maybe, it all depends at your level. It depends on your goals. It depends if you have issues in the colony, and Dodie might have a different frequency that she advises for that.
It does. Every good beekeeping answer starts with "it depends." So it does depend. And it's good to have a goal, have a reason for going into it. You're not just going in willy-nilly. You have a goal. And my first year, my goal was to see what the colony looks like when it's grown for 2 weeks. I could make up a goal to go in anytime. You don't want to disturb them as often as I wanted to disturb them. So have your goal. You're always, when you're going in, you're always looking either for your queen or to find out if you're queen right. And that might be the only thing you need to know. And by the time you've found queen right means I can't find my queen, but I see eggs. And I know eggs are 3 days. When she lays an egg, it's been within 3 days. So, okay, she's probably still in there because this egg is only 3 days old. So once I've looked at a few frames and by now I've realized, I've looked at these frames and I know what's going on. I know they're all looking good. And look, there's eggs. Okay, we're set. And then close it down. Some people are of the mind that you just do a quick peek and then maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, you do a deep dive where you look at all the frames. I do a couple of deep dives. I don't think it's every 6 weeks. I do one kind of in the spring. I do one after the honey flow, and I do one before I put my bees to bed. So I only go in and look at every frame top to bottom. Like I do it really the weekend of Thanksgiving because I've got extra time that weekend. It's a long weekend, right? And it's close enough to winter that I can just about put them to bed. I go all the way down, make sure I don't want to put them to bed with any pests or any issues, or, if I've got gross comb, I want to make sure that it's all the way out to the outside so it can be my frames that I take out next year. And I just get things set up. I think that you're probably going to spend a couple of hours every time you go into your bees, or I would plan that much. I probably wouldn't use that much, but as you're brand new, don't try to keep one hive open for 2 hours, but plan on a couple of hours. That way you have time to get suited up and light your smoker and think about what you're going to do and then go do it and then, put it all back together and head back to the house. So you're not really going to invest a whole bunch of time. There's going to be some setup time beforehand. There's going to be some time where you're putting your bees in, but then there's going to be whole days where you don't have to do anything. So you're not going to use a whole lot of time working your bees. Like 4 hours a month, maybe tops. And then as you get more bees, you've gained more confidence. You know what you're looking for. You're looking for bad. If everything looks good, then close it down and get out of there. Looking for bad. Oh, that doesn't look right. And you don't know what doesn't look right until you've seen it, right? And all you're seeing is nice, pretty brood. Once you start seeing bad, then you have a reason to look further and maybe pull out your camera and take a picture of it so you can send it around to your beekeeping friends and say, what is this? What am I seeing here? What's wrong? And getting some answers and figuring out what you might need to do for your bees. But having a goal, thinking about maybe a couple of hours.
I would say, it takes time to get ready and to have a plan and all stuff, but don't spend much more than 5 to 10 minutes in each of those colonies if you can avoid it. And then I would spend I think that the bulk of the time spent in beekeeping is actually in learning. You really want to learn the basics, the bee biology, read some books, beware of YouTube and Facebook advice, especially if it doesn't start well by "it depends" or asking you some questions. Usually people have a lot of opinions. They'll give you recipes. They don't even know the circumstances. They don't ask you where you are. And there's a lot of, second-year beekeepers that tend to want to, share their knowledge, which is great, but it can be dangerous if you listen to first year, second year. You really don't get to understand the way bees function and their life cycles and what to do and not to do until you're in like third year. And there's a huge learning curve, and you want to take it seriously if you want to be a successful beekeeper, because the rate of failure, if you don't, is about 40%. And that's an average. That could be a lot higher. And there's a lot of people that lose all their bees if they don't do the learning. And that's why I think recommending the Texas Master Beekeeper, at least the apprentice level for sure, is a great investment in your time. And or some of the classes. Texas Bee Supply offer classes. We offer the apprenticeship and other classes. And I think it's a well-spent investment that will protect your bees.
Absolutely. And go before you have the bees. So get your hands in the bees and make sure that it's something for you, because that might be when you decide that, nope, this is for me. Better to learn then than to have them and let them just go wild. Because we are in an Africanized zone, they could mate with Africanized drones, and then you'll have that more defensive genetic that even Natalie would requeen. And if they're too mean to go near, then
Yeah, there's ways.
they're no fun.
Great. Well, I think that that's a really good note to end on, is know who you're getting your information from. So thank you for sharing all this information. I really loved learning about all the different ways that you can keep bees as well, how there's almost no wrong way wherever you are, and it just how forgiving of a craft it can be while you have such a different kind of pet to take care of too. You know, it's not like a dog. We're not really used to understanding the biology of bees. So I appreciate, I hope everyone appreciated learning a little bit more about bees as well. And well, that concludes our event. However, Natalie and Dodie will be hanging out in the chats for just a few minutes, answering some of those, you know, easier to kind of get to questions. So don't worry if your more kind of one sentence question didn't get answered. So thank you, y'all, for doing that. And thank you to Texas Real Food for hosting this event and just connecting us more with our food. Again, this event will be able to be streamed and watched back for anybody who came in late, or if you want to send it to a friend. And we'll be sending out a link to everyone from Eventbrite to sign up for the newsletter, so that you can receive those resources, but also just stay in touch on our Facebook page and website. I also am just going to announce that we will be doing raising chickens for the next social circle, still kind of within that homesteading kind of realm, because you can raise chickens even if you live in maybe not in an apartment, but definitely in a townhouse in a city. So there's that. And then, yeah, just I would love for both of y'all to just touch again real quick about the courses that you have coming up. And then also, if you produce your own honey, you know, where folks can buy your honey or your products as well.
Yeah, and if you want to put the last slide up and then click the little play button, that will show them a little bit some of the info on the apprenticeship. But you can always contact us and ask questions. We're always happy to help, whether you're a customer of ours or not. We tend to offer professional services and consultations, and we sell very little bit of honey because that's not our core, but we can always help.
So for honey, go to realtexashoney.com. A lovely little map there, show you where all the, yes.
Thank you for doing my job, Dodie. I'm actually the chair of the program, and I completely didn't even think about that.
Great map. You can zoom in and find a beekeeper in your area so you can get your honey locally.
Yeah, that's basically, there's a lot of fraud in the honey industry. So if you want to make sure that you have honey that's what it says it is, and it's local to Texas, that's where to find it. But yeah.
Know your beekeeper.
Yeah, so this website, Be Mindful, and then the Real Texas Honey website are the two. And that's also where people can purchase honey. Is that correct?
The Real Texas Honey. Real Texas Honey will help you find on the map where a beekeeper is.
Where to purchase. Okay.
And you can go purchase it. There's a great link to the Texas Honeybee Education Association that has a really good pamphlet about things that you can do to help honeybees if you don't want to be a beekeeper. So
planting is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And limiting pesticides.
Right.
Yes, those are definitely good points to end on as well, right? Some things we kind of didn't really touch. I mean, it's almost been 2 hours, so we obviously covered a lot, but there's yeah, still wealths of information. So yeah, just a final thank you to everyone, and yeah, look out for our 2 expert panelists just answering some questions in the chat, but also reach out to them on their websites and continue learning about beekeeping. And yeah, just thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time at our next event. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening, Thursday evening. So thank you to our panelists, and thank you everyone for tuning in. So all right.